Hi, my name is Yannick, and today I'm here to talk to you about how my goat almost died from listeriosis. My goat is here with me today and is living proof that if you do treatment early and you provide the support that they need, they can survive. So don't lose hope. Don't get discouraged. I'm going to tell you the story of Amelia Bedelia, how she got sick, her symptoms, how long it took her to recover, her treatment plan, and a breakdown of the cost of treating her for listeriosis. And lastly, I'll give you an update 9 months later on how she's doing. The video and photos that I'm going to show you are graphic. She was very sick, so please keep that in mind. It all started on Friday, June 11th. I noticed that evening when my family and I were out sitting in the grass in our backyard that Fancy Nancy, one of our goats, was hanging out with us like she normally does and playing, but Amelia Bedelia didn't want to hang out with us. Normally our goats are always with us, wanting to be scratched and just curious about what we're doing, but Amelia Bedelia was off grazing on another part of the backyard, away from us, away from her sister. So I knew something was off, but she ate her dinner that night. She was drinking water. She looked healthy. So I put them to bed for the night, and the next morning when I came out, as soon as I opened the shed door, I knew something was terribly wrong. Amelia Bedelia was turning around in circles, and she just kept circling and circling. And I went to pet her, and it was like she didn't even acknowledge my presence. She just kept circling. I tried talking to her, I tried calling her name, I tried offering her food, but I couldn't get her attention. All she was doing was circling and circling. I grabbed my cell phone and I called my veterinarian. Unfortunately, it was a Saturday. And I also knew that her coming out on an emergency was unlikely, so then I started down my list of emergency vets in the area, and every vet that I called was unavailable. And I just kept leaving messages and calling around. I ended up calling different animal hospitals in the area to see if any would allow me to walk in with my goat. And when I explained that my goat was having neurological symptoms, each one said they could see the goat, but that there wasn't much that they could do with a neurological emergency, and they recommended going to an 24-hour emergency animal hospital for livestock. So I contacted a emergency hospital that's about an hour and a half from my house, and they said that they would be able to admit my goat, and that from what I was describing, it sounded like she had listeriosis. They said the prognosis of listeriosis is not good. Most goats that are showing neurological signs do not survive, and that my goat would need to be hospitalized, that the first night in the hospital would be $1,000. The second day we would be at least $2,000. With a infection like listeriosis and how quickly it progresses, she would have likely a prolonged hospital stay if she survived. I asked what the treatment would be if she was in the hospital, and the treatment is antibiotics and supportive care. So I asked them, because of my 7 years of experience as a veterinary technician, I'm completely comfortable with supportive care. It's something I can do at home. So they said if I can get an emergency vet to come to my house and examine my goat and prescribe the medications, that I could do the supportive care at home. They put me in contact with a equine veterinarian who was on call that could potentially come out and see my goat. So I gave her a call. She said that she was on an emergency currently, but she would come out to see my goat as soon as she could. After I got off the phone with the veterinarian, I went to check on Amelia Bedelia, and she was stumbling and falling over. This was a progression of her neurological symptoms, and after some research online on listeriosis and some of the other possibilities, I decided to go forward with antibiotics. With listeriosis, it's so important to aggressively treat with antibiotics early on, as soon as possible. Luckily, I already had injectable Pennicillin G in my refrigerator on hand in case of an emergency. It's something I like to have on hand on the farm. And so I decided to give Amelia Bedelia an antibiotic injection of Pennicillin G. I knew that she was 63 pounds, so I calculated out a dose for her of Pennicillin G. I am not a veterinarian. I just followed the directions on the bottle, and I gave her 4.1 mLs of Pennicillin G. I injected it into her muscle. So the emergency vet finally got here, and she did an exam on Amelia Bedelia. Her concern was listeriosis. She agreed that Pennicillin G was the correct course of action and that we would be continuing doing antibiotics. She gave Amelia Bedelia a Banamine injection, a Dexamethasone injection, a vitamin B complex fortified injection, as well as an Oxytet injection. At the time of her exam, her temperature had spiked to 105.1 degrees Fahrenheit. At this point, she kept falling down, and when she would fall, she would lay on her side stiffly with her legs sticking straight out, and her head would be thrown back at an odd angle. Sadly, this went on for a while, and eventually the injectables the veterinarian had given her kicked in, and she curled up into a fetal position, and she remained in that fetal position. That's about when the muscle tremors started. So while she was resting in that fetal position, I noticed that her body was twitching. It looked like she was having muscle tremors. I also noted that she hadn't been urinating or defecating at all since that morning. The vet talked to me about her prognosis. She let me know that because she already had neurological symptoms, the likelihood of her surviving this was pretty slim. It was really hard to hear that because I had gotten her at 8 weeks old and raised her up. And she's a part of the family. And I needed her to survive. The reason that I believe she got sick with listeriosis was because a few days before her symptoms started, her and Fancy Nancy had gotten out of their goat pen. When I was trying to come into the goat pen, they squeezed out. I was able to quickly run after them, and I grabbed Fancy Nancy and scooped her up and brought her and locked her back in, and I ran back to get Amelia Bedelia, but she had gotten into the chicken coop where I had put a compost pile that the chickens were working on, scratching through for the garden, and she had grabbed what appeared to be rotting fruit in her mouth. And so I quickly pulled it out of her mouth and scooped her up and brought her back into the goat pen. And I honestly think that's where she got listeriosis, that she must have gotten the bacteria from the moldy fruit and ingested some of it before I was able to get both goats away. I got rid of that compost pile. As much as the chickens enjoy compost, it's not worth it to have my goat get sick. Now my goat door has double locking features because it's just not something that I ever want my goat to go through again. Listeriosis, the vet explained, is a bacterial infection that affects the brain, and they can have neurological symptoms. it can be fatal in most cases. She said typically goats will die within 24 to 48 hours. So she said we're going to do her fluids, her antibiotics, and supportive care, and we should know in 48 hours whether she's going to survive this or not. She recommended that I isolate Amelia Bedelia from Fancy Nancy, so I moved her into a extra large dog crate in my garage, and I set her up with a lot of shavings for beddings and made her as comfortable as possible. She continued to remain in the fetal position. The medication seemed to make her more comfortable. I gave her subcutaneous fluids, which was fluids under the skin to hydrate her because she wasn't drinking water. I attempted to syringe feed her some water, but it was just dribbling right out of her mouth. She wasn't even attempting to swallow it down. I attempted to give her some of her grain that evening. She really tried to chew it, but it was as if her mouth just wasn't able to function properly and it was just falling out of her mouth. I warmed up some oatmeal, some instant oatmeal, because that's one of her favorite snacks, and I spoon-fed her oatmeal, and she was eager to eat it, but she did struggle. She had about a quarter cup of oatmeal and then she gave up. It was a very slow process just getting that quarter cup into her. The next day, which was Sunday, that morning she was still in the curled up position. I tried to get her up to walk, but she was really weak. When I stood her up, she would do slow circles around my legs, leaning into me. That only lasted a few minutes and then she collapsed. I tried giving her oatmeal on a spoon, but it didn't go well, and syringe feeding water didn't go well either. On Sunday, the day after the veterinarian had come out to see Amelia Bedelia that morning seemed really weak. She was still in the curled up fetal position. When I tried to get her up and moving, she was circling around my legs, leaning up against me, but collapsed shortly thereafter. I tried to give her some more oatmeal and syringe feed her some water, but she was really struggling to get any of it down. She still hadn't been able to urinate or defecate at that point. By Monday, which was more than 48 hours into her symptoms, she was honestly at her absolute worst. She was extremely weak. She couldn't eat or drink. She seemed as if she had a stroke, the way that her whole left side was drooping, her ear was drooping. She couldn't move her mouth to be able to eat and drink. It was like she was paralyzed or numb. Her blink reflexes were not working properly. She just had her eyes open at all times, so I was consistently throughout the day closing each of her eyes to keep them lubricated. I didn't have any eye lubrication, so I just manually did it for her in the hopes of preserving her eyesight. She still didn't urinate or defecate, which was worrying me. At this point, she was unable to walk at all. If I tried to get her up, her legs would just splay in all different directions. She was very weak and unsteady. That evening, she seemed worse. At this point, I was really worried I was going to lose her. I started looking online to see what I could do to essentially perk up a sick goat. I came across a YouTube video that talked about a recipe you can use to perk up a sick goat that included a sweet potato, a can of beer, water, and molasses. And at this point, I needed to try to get something into her that was going to give her just a boost. She needed a boost. She was really weak. So I cooked the sweet potato and I blended all the ingredients together where she really seemed to enjoy the flavor of it, and she was able to drink down about half of it, which was really encouraging because she hadn't been eating and drinking. And honestly, not that long after she had that, she actually seemed to perk up, which was extremely exciting because honestly that day had been talking to the veterinarian and she had prepared me that euthanasia would likely be the next step because of how she was doing so poorly and still neurologic, unable to walk, not urinating or defecating, not eating and drinking, and it was coming to the point where I was going to be needing to make a decision as to whether she needed to be euthanized, and that was not a call that I was ready to make. I was looking for signs from her because I wasn't ready to give up on her, and I didn't want her to give up. The next morning, Tuesday, 4 days into this, I went into the garage, and she actually picked her head up a little bit and she called to me. I couldn't believe it. She was actually calling out to me. It was such a relief just to hear her calling out. So I quickly put together that same sweet potato and beer molasses water combination, and I gave that to her. She was excited to have it. I mean, she still couldn't lift her head more than an inch, but it was something that she wanted to eat, that she was showing a will to live, that this recipe was exciting for her. It was, since she was able to get down the recipe, I then soaked some alfalfa pellets that I had and let those get nice and soft, and then I spoon fed those to her as well, since she still wasn't able to eat hay at this point because the chewing motion wasn't something she was really able to do. So the mushy alfalfa pellets actually worked out well. I wanted to keep this forward momentum of keeping her perky and really fighting. So I went to Tractor Supply and I picked up a couple things. I picked up goat Nutri drench and Goats Prefer probiotic paste. I wanted to make sure I got nutrients into her as well as some probiotics, just because she hadn't been eating and she missed a few days of meals, and I just wanted to really boost everything, get her really on a fast track to feeling better. And then she finally urinated and defecated. I couldn't believe it. It was she finally went. Not that she could get up and go to the bathroom. I mean, she urinated and defecated all over herself, but at least we're seeing some movement. Movement is good with a goat. I was able to get her to stand up with the help of a towel sling that I used and helped her. She was doing some circles around my legs again. Her hind end was still really weak, but she seemed like she had a bit more energy and was able to get up. So I called the vet and I gave her an update, and she was really happy to hear that she was actually coming around. So she said we could just continue the supportive care and just wait and see how she did. But it was really promising that she had made it 4 days and was actually showing signs of improvement at this point. Like she said, she didn't know how it would progress, if she would ever fully recover and gain back her normal functions. But honestly, the biggest thing at this point is that we had hope. If you take away anything from this video, it's that you need to have hope. Your goat needs to want to live. You need to give them that reason to live, something for them to be excited about, whether it's their favorite snack or a new recipe or just all the extra attention. So for supportive care, every day from that point on, we continued to feed her soft foods that were easy for her to swallow, continued to provide her with water, fluids. We gave her sponge baths as needed. She received massages every day. She also had physical therapy where I was moving her limbs because I was worried about the lack of movement, and so I was getting her up and trying to walk each day, and then while she was in the laying position I was moving her legs and just trying to keep everything moving, switching her from side to side so that she wasn't always on the same side. She preferred to always be on that left side with her head tucked, but I would bring her outside and I would lay her in the grass on the opposite side, lay her in the sun where she could spend a few minutes in the sunshine just soaking up the rays and being on the opposite side. So we kept going and going and going with this treatment with her in the garage. 11 days into treatment, she still wasn't walking on her own, but she was eating and drinking on her own. She was urinating and defecating on her own. These were promising signs, and I felt at that point that she really needed to be back outside with her sister. Her sister was not happy being the only goat out here. She really needed her sister back. They both needed each other. Goats are herd animals. They really need to be with their herd. So I put Amelia Bedelia in a wheelbarrow and wheeled her to the shed. At that point I was using a harness to be able to help her walk. it just gave me a little bit more control to keep her steady. At that point, she was still not walking on her own. She needed a lot of assistance. So I scooped her up, moved her into the shed, and I had her spend the day in the shed with Fancy Nancy. I set Amelia Bedelia up with food, water, and hay right nearby, and she was able to kind of reach and eat each thing. She was able to move her head to get to each bowl. That night, I closed the shed door and hoped for the best, that it would be a good night's sleep. The next morning, 12 days after the onset of symptoms, I came out, I opened the shed door, and she was in a different location. She had moved halfway across the goat shed, which I don't know if she dragged herself or if she actually got up and walked, but that was huge. Good morning. How was your first night? Did you have a good night? Hey, beautiful girl. You hungry? Want some breakfast? Yeah? And I was so excited that there was movement. She had urinated and defecated all over herself, but that's okay. She moved. She ate and drank her breakfast. She was doing really good that morning. I left the shed door open so that she could get nice fresh air and sunshine coming through while she laid in the shed. I came out a few hours later. I could not believe my eyes. She was standing up in the middle of the goat pen. Yeah, you're walking. Not sure how she got out of the shed, but she seemed okay and she was standing. I called her. She started walking. She did some circles, but she was actually walking on her own. This was huge. I could not believe it. She had been unable to walk without assistance for the last 12 days, and all of a sudden now she's just walking. Like, here we go, I'm walking now. I was floored. Super excited, but floored. She continued to try walking and getting up and moving. She got a little bit better each day. She really just kept pushing herself and kept trying. By June 25th, I noticed she was really walking a lot better. She still had that head tilt, but her gait was better and she was definitely more controlled in her movements. And before, when she was standing and walking, she was kind of doing funky motions to urinate and defecate to try to get it out. But by the 25th, she was able to normally urinate and defecate as she used to do. So it was really encouraging that we were actually seeing like forward progression, that she was actually getting back to her usual habits and her usual self. So now, 9 months later, what are we looking at? What's she looking like now? She is doing fabulous. She runs, jumps, eats, drinks, plays. She acts like a normal goat, and there's no more weird behavior, weird neurological signs, none of that going on. She is a very happy goat. Her eyes are normal, her ears are normal, there's no weird drooping. She's not doing the head tilt anymore. Every once in a while, I'll see her tilt her head, turn in a circle, and I'll go, oh no. But she's fine. Muscle memory maybe, I don't know, but otherwise she acts totally normal. She had a visit from her regular veterinarian who came out for her annual appointment, which was 4 months after her onset of symptoms, and the vet had noted that she was perfectly healthy. She was in a good body condition. The only noticeable factor was the slight head tilt that she had at that time, but otherwise all her blood work came back perfect. Her fecal sample was a extremely low parasite load, no need for treatment, and clean bill of health, so she was very happy with that. We had originally planned to breed our goats when they were 2.5 years old, so we were just coming up on that time, and so we were talking to the vet about it. And even though Amelia Bedelia is doing so good, the vet had recommended give her body the full year after her recovery, just to be sure her body can just fully heal itself, because it went through a lot. And pregnancy is a big feat in itself, so She said give her a full year, which is totally fine with me because after that scare, I want her to stay as healthy as possible. I don't want to do anything that's going to compromise her health. So if she wants to be an auntie for the rest of her life, she can certainly stay an auntie. We recently bred Fancy Nancy, and we're hoping that that was a success and that we'll have, girl. We're hoping that that was a successful breeding and that she'll have some kids this summer, and Amelia can be Auntie Amelia to Fancy Nancy's kids. But maybe someday in the future she'll get to be a mommy herself. We'll have to wait and see. And we'll certainly keep you updated on her progress. Oh, I had promised to tell you the cost of all of this treatment. Of course, right? Like, what is that gonna cost you? Okay, so here's the breakdown. It cost me $574 in vet bills. So now that was the emergency vet visit, and that was the fluids and all the injectable medications, needles, syringes. I had gone to Tractor Supply and I had bought the nutrient paste and the probiotics. So those cost me $16.99 for the Nutri drench and $9.99 for the probiotic paste. So the total cost was $602.67 for the treatment of Amelia Bedelia. I did already have the Pennicillin G in my fridge, so I didn't have that included in the price, but if I had taken her to an emergency hospital, it would have been thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because of how sick she was. She would have had to stay. It's something that if you're able to have a veterinarian come to your house, examine your goat, and give you the prescription medication, the fluids, and teach you how to give those fluids and give those injections, it's a lot less expensive to do it that way if you're able to do it yourself, which you totally can. It's definitely doable, and your goat really will benefit from having your love, your support, you being there for them, taking care of them. They know you, they trust you, and that goes a long way in helping them with their recovery. They need to feel safe. They need to not be stressed. They need to know they're safe. If it's not something you're comfortable doing, then definitely get the help that your goat needs. Get the treatment. Don't give up on them. It is scary, and it honestly, I thought she was gonna die. And I'm sure a lot of people choose at that point to euthanize because of how much they are suffering. But I'm here to tell you that they can survive this. They just need to be given the supportive care, the love, and the time, and the right medications, and they can beat this. They say that they can survive this if you catch their symptoms early enough. My goat was neurologic to the point where she was falling down. I didn't catch it early enough. Catching her the next morning where she was already neurologic, spinning in circles, head tilt, at that point, that was neurological symptoms. I mean, that's not catching it early, but yet she still survived. So there's hope. There's definitely hope. So please don't give up on your goat. Give them a chance. Let them fight. Help them fight. Oh, good girl. Come say hi to the camera. You want a carrot? Oh, tough little carrots. There you go. Tough. Break it off. Oh, almost. There you go. There you go. That's my girl. My little rock star, huh? Oh, look at that little tail wag. In the description below, I am going to leave a link so that you can print out a copy of the treatment that she received, all the medication, the doses, when she received them. That way you can see the treatment that was successful for her. I am not a veterinarian. These treatments were prescribed by a veterinarian, but that doesn't mean that it's the right treatment for your goat. So always ask for advice from your veterinarian, and that way you can be sure that you are treating your goat the correct way. Her veterinarian was highly suspicious of listeriosis for this girl, but there was also the concern of rabies. Even though she was rabies vaccinated, they can have similar neurological symptoms. So I was wearing gloves and kept the goats separate from each other. Polio was also another concern, or meningeal worms. She had recently been dewormed, so we felt the meningeal worms were unlikely, as the dewormer I had given was appropriate for meningeal worms. The vitamins that she received were also to cover our bases for vitamin deficiencies. And in the end, she survived. It was not rabies, it was listeriosis, and she is doing fantastic. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. The whole purpose behind making this video is in the hopes that this will help someone with their sick goat and bring them hope that there is a chance their goat can survive, and they just need to keep trying, keep holding out hope. Definitely check out some more of our videos.
1, 2, 3, 4. Now you're learning to farm like me. There is so much more to see. If you're planning on heading elsewhere, Bungie, yeah, yeah, yeah. This really is the place to be.